right. Good morning again. Good to see you guys this morning. We are going to let the kiddos slip back to children's church. I figure it's mostly the kids that are around each other all the time anyway, so not too many new germs to be spread there. If you're a guest and you got kiddos and you'd like them to go back to there, welcome to. We've got hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes ready. It'll be good. They're ready for that, ready for the kiddos. They'll have a good time together. All right, so for the rest of us, we are going to look at another parable this morning. And so if you want to start heading towards the book of Luke, we're going to be in the 16th chapter this morning. So head that direction if you would. All right, so as we think about the next parable, let me test my clicker here. Perfect. Technology is on our side this morning. As we think about this next parable, as I was preparing for it this week in the book of Luke, there's something from the Gospel of Matthew that came to mind. So we're going to go through this here in a minute. I think, again, we'll connect these thoughts. But there's a bit of advice that Jesus was giving his disciples, or maybe more than advice, really is kind of this warning and a charge all in one. But he says, listen, I'm going to send you out, and I'm going to send you out as sheep among wolves. And remember the next part, the next thing he said? He says, you are to be as wise or cunning as serpents and innocent as doves. Everyone remember Jesus saying that to his disciples? Right? I'm going to send you out. I'm going to send you out as sheep among wolves. So what does that mean? It's going to be a little dicey, right? If you're a sheep and you're hanging out with wolves, right, they're not your friends. They might like you for a season, okay, but they're really thinking about ways they can devour you, right? Okay, and so he's like, I'm going to send you out in a world that, might be kind to you for a moment, but that's only because they have other motives, right? Other things are going on. So you have to be wise as serpents, right? And typically serpents are viewed as what? If you're going to have a story with a snake in it, they're usually the bad guy, the villain, right? And even when you go back to the book of Genesis, right, we see that the enemy took the form of a serpent. And there's some even language there that talked about how the serpents, it wasn't necessarily maybe uncommon that the serpents were having these conversations and they were wise and things like that. So you got to be wise as serpents, okay, but innocent as doves, right? So you have to be cunning, you have to be smart, you have to be alert, you have to be clever, right? There's a word you're going to see here in a minute. You got to be wily, okay, but you also have to be innocent in your thoughts and your motives, and really in what you are doing and who you are doing it to, right? Your thoughts, your motivations, your actions all have to be representative of the kingdom. So with that in mind, right, we have a very interesting parable, because in this parable, it's almost like the anti-parable, because we're actually going to see Jesus talk about kind of a bad guy, right? He's kind of a villain. And what's interesting is Jesus is going to tell us you need to be a bit more like this villain. Right? Now, we're familiar with the concept of villains. Right? There's lots of villains today. We got superhero movies and all these different, murder mystery type things on TV. And we like a good thriller and action, things like that. And a lot of times I think what we find ourselves doing is sometimes we find ourselves even rooting for the villain. Has there ever been a bad guy in like a book or a movie or a story, and you kind of find yourself pulling for the bad guy? I thought this was interesting. I just, Google searches on the internet is full of interesting things, right? And so I Googled and I said, villains that people root for. All right? Anyone know what like the number one villain is that people root for? Megamind. That's a classic. Yeah. There's lots of good examples, but anyone see the movie Megamind? Like if you got kids, maybe, okay. Good example, but some of the top answers were actually kind of disturbing. The top one that kept coming up on I have like 3 or 4 or 5 different lists. And this one was like almost number one every time. It was the Joker. Yeah, so people are rooting for the Joker. Like, he's a homicidal maniac. I'm not really, there's one explanation that talks about, his view of humanity as being kind of irredeemable. How it fights against Batman. He's going to fight for everyone, or he's really convinced that there's people who really can't be saved. I guess that appeals to people. Okay, here's some other ones that I thought were interesting, and I think people need counseling. These came up on several lists. Freddy Krueger. Okay, like I haven't really seen those movies, but I'm pretty sure there's not much redeeming about him that you'd root for. I don't know. This one I thought was hilarious. And I have no idea. He wasn't on most of the lists, but like the very first list, about halfway down, there's like the top 20 villains people root for. Hannibal Lecter. I don't know. Someone voted for that, right? But so maybe not those, because those seem a little bit weird. But I did find some that I think make sense. Megamind's a great one. Here's one that I thought, again, just kind of on the funny side of things. Villains that you root for: the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park movie. You ever find yourself like, get him, like, oh yeah, he's got him, right? Like maybe when they're eating the bad guys, and so you kind of root for the dinosaurs. Okay. Here's one. This kind of goes along with even our word and our theme this morning. Wiley Coyote. How many guys are like, just let him catch the Roadrunner? Just like once, even if he doesn't eat him, they just like high five and say, I did it, and like be done. But you kind of feel sorry for him, right? He's trying so hard, and he just keeps blowing himself up and smashing himself with rocks. And so here's one that kind of goes along with Charles's answer. I found this one. I thought, oh, this is a good one too. How many of you guys have seen the movie Despicable Me? You see, it's a kids movie, right? So if you don't have kids, maybe you just like kids movies. Even if you don't have kids, that's fine too. There's a character named Gru, right? In the first Despicable Me movie, Gru, what is Gru trying to do? You guys remember? Let's see who actually watches these. He wants to steal the moon. And so everything he can do, he wants to steal the moon and make a name for himself. And in the process of that, he ends up like fostering these three girls, because he was going to use them to sell Girl Scout cookies and infiltrate this. And it was a whole story, whole movie. But he ends up kind of falling in love with these girls, and he wants to take care of them. And so instead of focusing on stealing the moon, his whole life becomes about taking care of these three little girls. And so it's really kind of one of those heartfelt moments. But you kind of begin to root for him. Like, he's the bad guy, but now you want him to succeed because he's actually turning his life around. So you get some interesting dynamics there. Well, Jesus is going to give us a parable. Well, he's going to present to his disciples here a man, right, who really you wouldn't think would be the kind of man that you would go, be more like this guy. Jesus is going to give us kind of the anti-hero. That's why I call it kind of the anti-parable. And he's going to say, I want you to be more like this guy. And it's going to be probably a little surprising, but he's going to explain what he means by this at the end of the parable. So a couple of things we have to unprogram here, right? We're going to deconstruct some things, because you're going to hear about a steward, right? We're going to hear about kind of an event. We're going to hear about riches and wealth, right? And we're going to hear about the owner. But you have to understand that those people, in the story, the riches and wealth in this case, not connected like the other stuff has been. Normally a steward or a manager, that's been either us, or in one case it was Jesus, right? And then the riches that he usually talks about, like the riches of the kingdom. And then the owner usually was Father God, okay? I want you to take all that and just set it on a shelf for a minute, because none of that applies for this parable. If it did, we'd all be in real trouble, right? So Jesus is going to tell a story that's a little bit disconnected from his other parables, but it's going to have an important point to it here. So here's what I want to do. I want to look at this parable. We'll read the whole thing. Then we're going to pick out kind of what's going on here. And then we'll figure out why it is that Jesus wants us to be kind of like the villain of this story. And so this is what I call wise and wily, right? So Wiley, like Wiley Coyote. You guys know why he was called Wiley Coyote, what the word wily means? It's like clever, crafty, cunning. Okay, so he actually had a reason his name was Wiley Coyote. Okay, all right. So maybe you learned something today. That could be it. All right, so let's read this parable, Luke 16, 1 through 8, and we'll go kind of pick it apart and see what Jesus is trying to teach us. So Luke 16, starting in verse 1, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Okay, so do we get that story? Do we see what happened there? Some guy cheats some other guy, and Jesus says, listen, I want you to be a little bit more like that guy. Why in the world? What's going on, right? So we'll pick it apart a little bit. Let's look at the three parts of this parable real quick. The perpetrator, the shrewd operator, right? The shrewd steward. This is the guy that Jesus says, I want you to pay attention to this guy. I want you to learn from this guy. So what's going on with him? Right? When we find out beginning of the story, he's a manager. Right? He's been managing basically the business of a rich owner, which we'll talk about more here in just a second. Typically, in their culture, they probably understand this. If you are a manager or a steward, especially of great riches and wealth, which he alludes to, you've been there for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time, and you're well connected. And so here you have this steward, right, who's been living the high life, living off his master's goods and his master's land and all this different stuff. Right, gets accused of mismanaging some funds, finds himself kind of in a precarious situation. He's about to lose everything that he's grown accustomed to. Right? And what's he say? He says, listen, I can't dig, right? And maybe he could and he just didn't want to. And it's too far beneath me to beg. Right? So he's going to have to what? He's going to have to come up with some kind of plan for self-preservation. Now, what's one of the strongest motivators in any person's life? Self-motivation. And we're going to see it here. All he's ever known is money. All he's ever known is basically the high life. And he goes, listen, I can't not live this way. To him, this would be the end of his life. He goes, I'm going to do whatever it takes to maintain my lifestyle, my status, my comfort, whatever it is I believe that I need. I'm going to do whatever it takes. There's a phrase that I've heard before. Maybe you've heard this. You kind of can fill in the blank for the first part, but you basically end it with "or die trying." Right? We're gonna win, or we're gonna die trying. Or we're gonna get rich, or die trying. Have you ever heard that phrase when someone said before? I'm gonna do whatever it is. Fill in that blank. I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna accomplish that, or I'm gonna die trying. Because the only thing that matters at that moment in their life is whatever that thing is they're filling the blank in with. So for this steward, he says, listen, I can't be poor. I can't go be a common person. I can't live my life any other way. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to maintain my lifestyle, right, or I'm going to die trying. And so he puts his mind to the task. He is again, sold out to this proposition, right, of maintaining his lifestyle. So what's the crime? What does he do? Well, he does what I call insider trading. Okay? So he has connections. He's been in the business long enough, right? He's done all the transactions. He knows all the players. Because I'm going to start going to these other people who are also rich, and I'm going to start doing them favors. Because if you do a rich person a favor, what's the hope? That they will reciprocate that, and they're going to end up doing a favor to you. And you look at some of these. He says he went to all his debtors. He has two examples. Again, the language there's probably more. But Jesus, let me give you a couple examples. He went to one guy, right, and it's like, 800 gallons of olive oil. That's a lot of olive oil, right? You think about, what does that mean for money? I think one of the commentaries said, the 400 gallons that he says, listen, I'm going to write that off. Just pretend like that doesn't exist. That 400 gallons is something like 2 years' wages for a typical person, right? So, you're talking $100,000 in olive oil, because listen, I'll write that off. Just pretend like that doesn't exist, right? Or kind of a wink and a shrug and a handshake, okay? And you'll only owe half that. Just remember who did that for you, right? And he goes to the next guy, kind of the same thing with that wheat. I'm going to forgive you a substantial amount of money, because Jesus talks a lot about money and riches, right? This time it's not about the kingdom. Still a lot of money. I'm going to, again, kind of give you that shrug and a wink and a handshake and say, listen, forget about that. Let's just pay back this part, and we'll call it good. And so he begins to go use his knowledge, use his connections, use kind of his status to make these deals behind the owner's back. Right? And again, it's in hopes that one of these people will remember this, or he'll be able to go to them later on and say, hey, remember what I did for you? I need a favor now. Right? I need to call in that debt, basically, that you owe me. And then we get to we get to what I call the reprobate rich man. Okay, so here's a guy obviously not running his own affairs. He's left it to this steward. And even when he hears that something's going wrong, he says, yeah, I probably should fire you. You need to come here and tell me what's been going on. There's obviously a time gap here because the steward has time to go and do what? To make the deals and to try to save his backside. And so the owner's not really on top of things. The owner's not really heavily invested in maybe doing things the right way. Okay, he's not one that's wanting to really put in the work. He just wants to enjoy the spoils. At this point in his life, he's able to do that. We see a lot of people like that in the world today. They don't really care about responsibility or right and wrong, as long as they're getting what they're getting, as long as they're fat and happy, whatever. And so that's kind of the owner. He's like, yeah, we need to take care of this, right? But obviously he's been doing okay, even with this shrewd steward who's been taking things under the table. But then we get to that point, the last part of the story, where he's done these dirty deals and he's made these favors to rich people. He's trying to preserve his own life. And when the owner finds out, the owner is what? Not angry, is he? The owner is impressed. He goes, dude, that was pretty slick. He goes, I wish I would have thought of that. Like, you were about to get toasted, right? You were about to lose everything. And just in a blink of an eye, your devious little mind came up with a scheme that's kept you from being broke. And he's like, slow clap, like, good job, right? Not even angry about it. Why? Because he sees that this man basically kind of outmaneuvered him, right? Outmaneuvered even those other guys, and he has placed himself in a prime position to maintain his lifestyle, everything he thought he was going to lose. Okay? That's pretty devious. That's pretty wily. That's pretty cunning. Right? And so as we get to that parable, and that's the end of the story, right? You're like, well, where's the justice? Where's the right and wrong? Jesus says, well, it's either in verse 8, right? And here's the purpose of him telling the story. In verse 8, he says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Remember, he's talking to his disciples. What's the point of this story? He's like, listen, here's this example. And this example has happened, I'm sure, multiple times, throughout existence, throughout the history of people on this planet, where people have schemed and devised and become cunning to get their way and to preserve their life and do whatever it took. And people kind of smirk and grin and go, yeah, that was pretty tricky. Good job. The disciples aren't completely naive to that, I'm sure. But Jesus, and here he gives the story, goes, I actually want you guys to study this. But I actually want you guys to understand that you need to be a little bit more like this steward. Okay? You need to be a little bit more like, in a sense, this villain of the story, because the people of this world are very shrewd and cunning in how they deal with each other, and so should be the people of light. We should be innocent as doves, yes, but we should not be naive. We shouldn't be aloof. We shouldn't be so disconnected that we don't see the opportunities to use the mind and the abilities that God has given us, not for our own gain, okay, but for kingdom work. And so he's going to give them some examples of what that would look like. And so lest we think that we're supposed to go out and cheat and lie and steal and do whatever it takes or die trying, let's see now what Jesus is telling his disciples. Here's how I want you to be shrewd, like the servant is shrewd. All right, he says in verse 9, we see that money is meant to be invested eternally. So if we keep going in verse 9, it says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now you just read verse 9, and what's that sound like? It sounds like Jesus is saying, buy friends and buy your way into heaven. Is that what he's saying? If you kind of take this out of context, you don't read the verses before and after it, what is he saying here in verse 9? I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. Are we supposed to buy our friends? Impress people with our money and our stuff? No. So he's going back, alluding back to that shrewd steward. What did he do? He used his money. It wasn't really his money, but he used his availability and his kind of status and his name that was tied to money to get what he needed to maintain his world. All right, he was very shrewd in that way. He used his status. It was his owner's money, but he had connections and ability to use it. And he used that for his own purposes to gain what he wanted. And so Jesus is saying, listen, in this world, you're going to be given a certain amount of money, a certain amount of possessions, right? Even certain gifts, talents, and abilities. And you saw how that steward used all those to his advantage to get what he wanted. Listen, disciples, and even for us today, church members, Christians, if your desire is to see the kingdom grow, and if your desire is to spend eternity with the people that you're sitting next to in your pew, then you ought to be investing into them and anyone that God brings into your path in the same way that this steward invested into his own selfish future. That is to say, if you've been given money, you invest that into kingdom work. Right? And that could be specifically individually to people that God's given you to help. That could be into the church. That could be into missions. But you're going to invest that because the most important thing to you is the kingdom and eternity. If he's given you material, stuff, a house, land, whatever that is, find ways to use that for the benefit of the kingdom. Right? Your time, your ability, your talents. Find ways to use that for the kingdom, as if that is the most important thing to you, because when you invest in the kingdom, you get eternal rewards. When this life is done and the money's all gone because it doesn't matter anymore, and you leave here via death or resurrection, what matters when you get to heaven, you see all those people standing next to you whom you invested in. And just like that shrewd steward, it was his prime motivation. The only thing he was concerned about was preserving himself. Jesus says, listen, your prime motivation ought to be in the investment of others for kingdom work. All right. Take a moment. Okay, these are all good platitudes. These are good things that the pastor is supposed to tell you. But take a moment and consider how you spend your money, how you spend your time, how you use your resources like your home or a property you might have. Even things like vehicles. What about talents? Things like that. If we were to take all the stuff that you are a steward of, all right, and then we were to assess how well or how much you use them for the kingdom, and then we were going to put a graphic display up here on the screen for everyone to see, how many of you guys would be like, you better put me up there first because I'm ready? Anyone want their life laid bare like that? Again, this steward's life got laid completely open. And he didn't even hide it. He was going to beg, borrow, steal, whatever it took to get what he wanted, what he needed. Jesus says, listen, with that same kind of urgency, motivation, we're talking about panic right now with this virus stuff. Maybe it's even like a spiritual panic to go, I've got to invest. I've got to take what God has given me and I've got to use it in the most effective and passionate way possible for the kingdom. Jesus says, go out and invest in friends, invest in people. Right? Go out and share that gospel. Whatever God gives you, you freely give it away and use it for kingdom work because it's going to have eternal benefits and eternal rewards. If we're willing, if this steward is willing to go this far, right, so he can live in comfort, how far are we willing to go so people can live in eternity? Right? Okay? Let that sink in for a minute. I know we're few in number. It's awful quiet in here, so we're going to let that just ruminate for a second. How far are we willing to go, right? How much scheming are we willing to do to ensure that everyone that God puts in our path at least has that opportunity to know him and spend eternity with him, right? Are we putting our time, money, talents, materials to work for the kingdom? He's not telling us to go out and buy friends. He's not telling us to go out and impress people with our stuff. It's to use it for kingdom work. All right. So then he's going to move in and talk a little bit, I think a good reminder about the difference between an owner and a steward. In this case, that owner was not a very good owner. He didn't really know what was going on with his stuff. Right? God is not that kind of owner. When Jesus tells a parable and God's the owner, he knows exactly what's going on inside his business. Right? When an owner appoints a steward, he appoints someone he can trust. Right? He knows what's going to happen with that business. We've already seen that with the parable of the talents. He came back and he knew what his money should have done in the hands of his stewards. That's why he's upset with the one that did nothing. Because an owner knows the operation of his business and all the ins and outs and dealings thereof. Here we have an example of a poor owner. right? And a poor owner is a good representation of the world. How we take our wealth and use our wealth, we're not good owners of it, right? We think we're owners of it, but the way the world creates wealth and what they value, it's not good, right? We mismanage that. And then when people buy into the idea of what wealth is, they become lazy and poor stewards who basically cheat, lie, and steal. That's the way the world works. That's culture, right? Do whatever you whatever you want to do, get whatever you can, or die trying, right? And so here I think is a little example, a reminder for the disciples about them being good stewards of the real and good owner. Verse 10 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? So what's the commendation here? What's the encouragement? What's he talking about? When you have been given something, be it small, be it little, right? You have to remember that that's been given to you. You're a steward. The owner has entrusted you with it. And as you take things, right, maybe you start off small, but as you take those things and you manage them well, you'll be given more and given more and given more. And perhaps even in the story at some point, this manager was a good manager, right? We don't really know that. All we know is that he's not a good manager. He's not an honest manager, and he's been given a great deal of wealth, right, to manage. That's a bad combination. Jesus is saying, listen, as you've been given these things, and you've been given wisdom and little bits of the kingdom and understanding, you take that and you manage it well, and you steward it well, and you grow in that, and more is given, and more is given. Right? You will not find yourself in the place like this shrewd steward, right? Who basically got overcome with power and greed and all these things when he was fighting for his very existence. It's not really the way the kingdom works, right? As you are given little and grow in that, you've been given more and more and more, and you learn to be responsible with it. And that even ties back to what we just talked about. As we understand deeper the kingdom, right, we should have a greater desire to invest back in it. And it's kind of circular, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. You have some warnings there in verse 11 and 12, and this almost sounds to me like maybe there's even some echoes of eternity here a little bit, where he's talking about, listen, if you can't manage things here, can you really expect to be in the kingdom one day with all that kingdom stuff, right? You see that in verse 11 and 12. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Well, what are true riches? That's eternity. That's heaven, right? That's kingdom stuff. If you can't be trusted that you're going to take what God has given you here and use it for the kingdom, if you're not kingdom-minded now in life, then can you really say for sure with confidence that you're going to be kingdom-minded in eternity? And I think there's maybe a good warning inside of that. Maybe a good moment of self-reflection to go, when I get a paycheck, when I get blessed with something, I never consider how that's to be used for God. That's mine. And Jesus is telling his disciples, as you get and as you've been given, right, and as it grows, all the time, every time, your thought, your motivation, your heart ought to say, how can I use this for the kingdom? If that never crosses your mind, can you really honestly say that you're worried and concerned about the kingdom, or that your thoughts are on the kingdom, or that one day you even plan to be in the kingdom because you're not investing in it now? And again, not to say that we buy our way into heaven, right? But our heart, our motivations, our actions, our works speak about where and what we've placed our faith in. If nothing about who you are or what you're doing is being invested back into the kingdom, right? There is concern about if you're even really about or for the kingdom. That steward, when he was presented with that problem, didn't stop and go, I should be a better manager. And I really should go to my master and say, I'm sorry, and I want to do better for you. He had no thought about the owner. He had no thought about anything that he had mismanaged or stolen. It was only about himself. Had he been a person of character, had he been any kind of maybe nobility, right, in any thought of doing what was right, he would have gone and apologized and said, give me another opportunity to show you that I want to do well for you. Didn't do those things. It was all about him. It was all about getting what he wanted. Jesus says, listen, it's when you're in the kingdom, when you're doing kingdom work, it's all about the owner. It's all about the master. It's all about the kingdom work. And if you're not thinking about that now, you won't be thinking about that later, and it's very likely that that's not even in your heart or mind at all. And so the last thing, I think Jesus is trying to tell us here, right, is that when it comes specifically to money, right, in the wealth of this world, okay, that we need to be wily and not wicked. Okay? What's that word wily mean again? We need to be crafty. We need to be cunning. Right? We need to be wise. We need to come up with plans to maximize what God has given us. That shrewd steward, right? For as wicked as he might have been, he did probably the most crafty and wise thing he could have done to maintain his wealth and position. Right? There's a lot of things he could have done. He could have given up. He could have become a beggar. He could have tried to dig a ditch. He said, I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to use my brain, and I'm going to go and figure this out. He did. And Jesus says, listen, I need you guys to be a little more like this. As you've been given stuff and more is entrusted to you in the kingdom, and your mind is kingdom-minded, and you see that God has given you a little bit of wealth or a little bit of material or time, talent, whatever that is, I want you to see in your mind all the opportunities and the possibilities for how that gets invested back into the kingdom. Verse 13 says, no servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It says, listen, you will, by your actions, prove who and what you are devoted to. Right? If you're wicked, when you get a little bit of money, what are you going to want? You're going to want more money. Right? If you're wicked and you get a little bit of stuff, you're going to look at that and go, I want more stuff. But if you're wily in a way, again, that you're considering the kingdom, you get a little bit of money and you go, how can I use this for someone else's benefit, the kingdom benefit, for God's glory, whatever it is. When I get a little bit of status, when I get a little bit of stuff, when I get a little bit, again, time, talent, whatever that is, I begin to look at that as opportunities for the kingdom. What does that say about my heart? What does that say about who and what I serve? If I'm always thinking about what I can do for God, that says my heart is set on things of God. If I get something and I only think about what I can do for myself, then my heart is only set on myself and that object that's been placed in my hand. Again, that steward, for as cunning and wise as he was only concerned about who? Himself. How am I going to maintain this lifestyle, this status, whatever it is? Jesus says, I want you to be cunning like him. I want you to be thinking like him. I want you to be wise like him. I want you to know that that's how the world operates, and you're still in the world. So I don't want you to be surprised by these things. I don't want you to be him, right? I don't want you to be devoted to the money and the stuff and himself. I want you to be devoted to God and serve him as master, but I want you to know that you can be cunning and wily, just like him, but in amazing ways for the kingdom. Be smart. Right? If God's giving you time or giving you ability or talent of some sort, use it. God brings about a business opportunity and you go, listen, I could use this for the kingdom benefit. And then do it. Right? If God blesses you with a big bank account, go, how can I use this for the kingdom? Be wily, be smart, be wise, and do it. Don't be afraid of it. I think sometimes as Christians, we're afraid of money because money is what? We often hear it said the money is the root of all evil, but it's not. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? I think sometimes as Christians, we get afraid of that. Maybe we think as Christians, we take that vow of poverty. Jesus saying, listen, take the good gifts I've given you, use them for the kingdom. Be crafty, be cunning. That's the way he's made us. He's made our minds to be thinkers. So when you're thinking, think about ways to invest in the kingdom. Make God your master. Again, when you've been given little, be faithful. When you've been given a lot, be faithful. It'll prove what your true vision is. Okay? And take that money and invest it into others so that one day you can stand beside them in heaven knowing you did whatever it took. Get them to heaven or die trying. You invested everything, all your worldly possessions, in growing the kingdom of God. So we have, again, kind of an interesting parable. I've read this parable before. I've never really taken time to maybe pick it apart. And I think it's good that we take a moment to understand what Jesus is saying. Let's be crafty and cunning for the kingdom, right? Let's use our brains. God has given them to us for a reason, for a purpose. And let's not be afraid of the tools and the resources that God places before us. Let's be wise with them, yes, right? But let's put them to work for the kingdom. If you would stand with me, we'll close it off right there. We'll end a little bit early. There'll be time for voluntary greeting that I don't necessarily sanction right out in the foyer. But glad you guys are here. I know that these are interesting times, to say the least. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for taking time to worship, being the Word. And even as we approach these kind of interesting times we're in, here's another great admonition. Be crafty, be wily. Yeah, we need to be cautious, but that doesn't mean that we completely fall away and retract ourselves from the world. I know that right now is kind of like the introvert's paradise, right? Everyone's been told to stay home and not talk to anyone. And there's some of us that are like, praise God, right? But let's be crafty and cunning even in this time for how we can show love, for how we can show hope and confidence, right? There's great opportunity when the world is panicking for us to go, no, we got this, right? They're kind of like that shrewd steward going, what are we going to do? Our way of life is under threat. And we go, hey, let me tell you about a way of life that can never be taken away from you, right? Great opportunities to invest right now, time, money, whatever that is that God's given us as people are panicking. So let's focus on that as well. But maybe there's a place, a time, something's going on in your life where you go, listen, I could be a bit more shrewd and cunning in how I deal with that. God's given me that person, that place, this money, whatever it is, and I need to turn around and I need to use that for kingdom stuff. And so maybe you'll place it on your heart to be good steward, right? Not necessarily here the shady, steward, but he was crafty, right? So we can be good, crafty stewards of what God has given us and use it for His kingdom. And we should pursue that. We should strive for that. We should be motivated for it. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. We'll have a quick time of response, and then we'll wrap up the service. Couple quick announcements for things that are coming up. This is going to kick off spring break week. We're going to have a quick meeting right after this service to talk about Mission Arlington. That's coming up and some of the things that might be affected by that or vice versa. So if you're going to Mission Arlington, you can be a part of that. We'll meet right up here up front, right when service is done. Home group, are we doing home group tonight? That was kind of up and down. Okay. Yes, so home group. We're going to go ahead and do home group tonight. I know, again, we're not trying to be fearful, but sometimes it's cautious, and we get kind of crazy with things going here, there, and everywhere. So it's going to be hosted by the Thorntons, but not the Thorntons, the Thorntons, right? So it's going to be Amaziah and Trey are going to host it tonight. And so if you need directions to their house, grab one of them. They'll be glad to let you know. I think it's tacos on the menu, something like that. Okay. So if you want to bring something, let them know. So home group's still going on, 5:30, 6 o'clock tonight. There'll be nothing else going on up here. As far as we know, we'll still do perishables, food bank. That kind of stuff might change. You may just kind of keep track of some things that are beyond our control as things maybe close down or shift or change. As far as I know, we're going to keep doing everything that we've scheduled to do. We'll just try to be cautious as we do it, and just, again, kind of keep yourself informed and updated of what's going on. We've got anything else going on for this week? We just had men's breakfast. So dinner will be towards the end of the month. Ladies just did their prayer and share and all that good stuff. So just keep informed. Like I said, look at your bulletin. We are looking forward to next Sunday having a business meeting. After that will be a fifth Sunday serve. We'll have our fifth Friday feed for Church in the Park coming up soon. We're still collecting like little travel size stuff for that, toothpaste and hygiene items, so we can make hygiene bags for Church in the Park. So still got lots of things we can be doing. We're not shutting down. We're not stopping. If you know someone who's kind of self-quarantining, things like that, reach out and encourage them. I know some folks, it is a risk for them to be out and contract anything. So encourage them, send them a letter, send them a text, phone call, whatever that good stuff is. Let them know that they're still loved. So anything else going on you make an announcement about? Again, just stay informed. If you need anything, please contact me or contact one of the deacons, and we'll be glad to help. Yeah, so no kids, no youth Wednesday night. Spring break week, we usually take a break because everyone's here, there, and everywhere. So Wednesday night activities will be pretty well shut down up here. Yeah, great announcement. Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we will consider ourselves dismissed. Father, we love you. Again, I thank you for a time to be in your house, to sing praises to your name, to be in your word. I pray that we really do seek to be shrewd in how we deal with the things you've given us, the resources you've given us, Father, that we don't want to be the villain of the story, Father, but we want to have a mind and a heart that says whatever it takes to do kingdom work, to invest in the kingdom, however little or however much you've given us, Father, we want to be eternally minded. Father, help us if we find ourselves having no thought of eternity, what that means for us, Father. We want to know that this life is meant to be lived for you, not just the life that's to come, Father. I pray that you would help us every day. Remind us, Father, the God of who we serve, who loves us. Again, help us not to be conflicted in Father, our priorities or even our loyalties, Father, that you would be our master, our one true God. And I pray you give us opportunities this week to go out and be generous and be crafty and wily for you, Father. I pray that you'd protect those, Father, who have the health conditions, Father, who are at risk during this time, that you'd keep them safe, that you keep us all healthy, Father, and bring us back safely next time. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Thank you all.